Aerial warfare is the use of military aircraft and other flying machines in warfare. Aerial warfare includes bombers attacking enemy concentrations or strategic targets, fighter aircraft battling for control of airspace, attack aircraft engaging in close air support against ground targets, naval aviation flying against sea and nearby land targets, gliders, helicopters and other aircraft to carry airborne forces such as paratroopers, aerial refueling tankers to extend operation time or range, and military transport aircraft to move cargo and personnel. Historically, military aircraft have included lighter-than-air balloons carrying artillery observers, lighter-than-air airships for bombing cities, various sorts of reconnaissance, surveillance and early warning aircraft carrying observers, cameras and radar equipment, torpedo bombers to attack enemy shipping, and military air-sea rescue aircraft for saving downed airmen. Modern aerial warfare includes missiles and unmanned aerial vehicles. Surface forces are likely to respond to enemy air activity with anti-aircraft warfare. Kite warfare. The earliest documented aerial warfare took place in ancient China, when a manned kite was set off to spy for military intelligence and communication. Balloon warfare. Balloon warfare in ancient China in or around the 2nd or 3rd century, a prototype hot air balloon, the Kongming lantern, was invented in China, serving as a military communication station. Balloon warfare in Europe. Some minor warfare use was made of balloons in the infancy of aeronautics. The first instance was by the French Aerostatic Corps at the Battle of Fleurus in 1794, who used a tethered balloon, l'entreprenant, to gain a vantage point. Balloons had disadvantages. They could not fly in bad weather, fog, or high winds. They were at the mercy of the winds and were also very large targets. American Civil War. Union Army Balloon Corps. The American Civil War was the first war to witness significant use of aeronautics in support of battle. Thaddeus Lowe made noteworthy contributions to the Union war effort using a fleet of balloons he created in June 1861. Professor Thaddeus S.C. Lowe left his work in the private sector and offered his services as an aeronaut to President Lincoln, who took some interest in the idea of an air war. Lowe's demonstration of flying a balloon over Washington, D.C., and transmitting a telegraph message to the ground was enough to have him introduced to the commanders of the topographical engineers. Initially it was thought balloons could be used for preparing better maps. Lowe's first action was a free-flight observation of the Confederate positions at the First Battle of Bull Run in July 1861. Lowe was called to Fort Corcoran and ascended in order to spot rebel encampments. With flag signals he directed artillery fire on the rebels. Lowe and other balloonists formed the Union Army Balloon Corps. Lowe insisted on the strict use of tethered flight because of concern about being shot down over enemy lines and punished as spies. By attaining altitudes from 1,000 feet to as much as 3.5 miles, an expansive view of the battlefield and beyond could be had. As the Confederates retreated, the war turned into the Peninsula Campaign. Due to the heavy forests on the peninsula, the balloons were unable to follow on land, so a coal barge was converted to operate the balloons. The balloons and their gas generators were loaded aboard and taken down the Potomac, where reconnaissance of the peninsula could continue. At the Battle of Fair Oaks, Lowe was able to view the enemy army advancing and sent a dispatch to have reserves sent. The Balloon Corps was later assigned to the Engineers Corps. By August 1863, the Union Army Balloon Corps was disbanded. Confederate Army. The Confederate Army also made use of balloons, but they were gravely hampered by lack of supplies due to embargoes. They were forced to fashion the balloons from colored silk dressmaking material, and their use was limited by the infrequent supply of gas in Richmond, Virginia. By the summer of 1863, all balloon reconnaissance of the American Civil War had ceased. Before World War I, the United States Navy had been interested in naval aviation since the turn of the 20th century. In August 1910, Jacob Elfickel did the first experimenting with Glenn Curtis shooting a gun from an airplane. In 1910–1911, the Navy conducted experiments which proved the practicality of carrier-based aviation. On November 14, 1910, near Hampton Roads, Virginia, civilian pilot Eugene Ely took off from a wooden platform installed on the scout cruiser Birmingham. He landed safely on shore a few minutes later. Ely proved several months later that it was also possible to land on a ship. On January 18, 1911, he landed on a platform attached to the American cruiser Pennsylvania in San Francisco Harbor. The first use of airplanes in an actual war occurred in the 1911 Italo-Turkish War, with the Italian Army Air Corps bombing a Turkish camp at Ain, Zara, Libya. In the First Balkan War, the Bulgarian Air Force bombed Turkish positions at Adrianople, while the Greek aviation performed over the Dardanelles. The first naval air cooperation mission in history. Airplanes were also used by the United States Army against Pancho Villa. Air reconnaissance was carried out in both wars too. The air-dropped bomb was extensively used during the First Balkan War, and subsequently shared with the Imperial German Air Service during World War I. In World War I, both sides initially made use of tethered balloons and airplanes for observation purposes, both for information gathering and directing of artillery fire. A desire to prevent enemy observation led to airplane pilots attacking other airplanes in balloons, initially with small arms carried in the cockpit. The addition of deflector plates to the back of propellers by French pilot Roland Garros and designer Raymond Saulnier in the Morane-Saulnier monoplane was the first example of an aircraft able to fire through its propeller, permitting Garros to score 3 victories in April 1915. Dutch aircraft designer Anthony Fokker developed the gun Synchronizer in 1915, resulting in German Lieutenant Kurt Windgens scoring the first known victory for a synchronized gun-equipped fighter aircraft on July 1, 1915. The Allies quickly developed their own synchronization gears, leading to the birth of aerial combat, more commonly known as the dogfight. Tactics for dogfighting evolved by trial and error. The German ace Oswald Boelke created 8 essential rules of dogfighting, the Dicta Boelke. Both sides also made use of aircraft for bombing, strafing, sea reconnaissance, anti-submarine warfare, and dropping of propaganda. The German military made use of Zeppelins and, later on, bombers such as the Gotha, to drop bombs on southern England. By the end of the war, airplanes had become specialized into bombers, fighters, and observation aircraft. By the end of World War I, aerial combat had progressed to the point where dogfighting tactics based on such doctrines as the Dicta Boelke had progressed to the point that air supremacy could be achieved. The earliest example is the Italian air offensive against the Austro-Hungarians just before the end of World War I. Interwar period. Between 1918 and 1939, aircraft technology developed very rapidly. In 1918, most aircraft were biplanes with wooden frames, canvas skins, wire rigging and air-cooled engines. Biplanes continued to be the mainstay of air forces around the world and were used extensively in conflicts such as the Spanish Civil War. Most industrial countries also created air forces separate from the army and navy. However, by 1939, military biplanes were in the process of being replaced with metal-framed monoplanes, often with stressed skins and liquid-cooled engines. Top speeds had tripled, altitudes doubled, ranges and payloads of bombers increased enormously. Some theorists, especially in Britain, considered that aircraft would become the dominant military arm in the future. They imagined that a future war would be won entirely by the destruction of the enemy's military and industrial capability from the air. The Italian general Giulio Douhet, author of The Command of the Air, was a seminal theorist of this school, which has been associated with Stanley Baldwin's statement that the bomber will always get through, that is, regardless of air defenses. Sufficient raiders will survive to rain destruction on the enemy's cities. This led to what would later be called the strategy of deterrence and a bomber gap, as nations measured air force power by number of bombers. Others, such as General Billy Mitchell in the United States, saw the potential of air power to augment the striking power of naval surface fleets. German and British pilots had experimented with aerial bombing of ships and airdropped torpedoes during World War I with mixed results. The vulnerability of capital ships to aircraft was demonstrated on 21 July 1921 when a squadron of bombers commanded by General Mitchell sank the ex-German battleship SMS Ostfriesland with aerial bombs, although the Ostfriesland was stationary and defenseless during the exercise. Its destruction demonstrated the potency of airplanes against ships. It was during the Banana Wars, while fighting bandits, freedom fighters and insurgents in places like Haiti, the Dominican Republic and Nicaragua, that United States Marine Corps aviators would begin to experiment with air ground tactics, making the support of their fellow Marines on the ground their primary mission. It was in Haiti that Marines began to develop the tactic of dive bombing, and in Nicaragua where they began to perfect it, while other nations and services had tried variations of this technique. Marine aviators were the first to embrace it and make it part of their tactical doctrine. Germany was banned from possessing an air force by the terms of the World War I armistice. The German military continued to train its soldiers as pilots clandestinely until Hitler was ready to openly defy the ban. This was done by forming the Deutsche Luftsportverband, a flying enthusiasts club, and training pilots as civilians. And some German pilots were even sent to the Soviet Union for secret training. A trained air force was thus ready as soon as the word was given. This was the beginning of the Luftwaffe.